So I'd like to say hello to everyone. I'm Jonathan from Carbon Co-op, and this is the fourth in our series of 4 lunchtime lectures covering different aspects of retrofit for community energy groups. A project funded by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. The session is aimed mainly at community energy organisations, not-for-profit organisations based in localities. But I know in previous sessions we've had a fair few people from local authorities and other places as well. So if you want to just share where you're from, what your organisation is in the chat, give us an understanding of where we're at. Today's session is on engagement and recruitment. And as organisations running this was Carbon Co-op, South East London Community Energy, and also Brighton and Hove Energy Cooperative, Energy Services Cooperative. Today it's Behesco who are running the session, and Dan. So yeah, Dan, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I wish I earned the wages that Brighton and Hove Albion bring in, but it's not quite the same for community energy. So yeah, my name is Dan Curtis from Brighton and Hove Energy Services Co-op. I've been with the organisation since 2015, involved in various community engagement exercises over the years, whether that was for low carbon heat networks or energy efficiency programs or fuel poverty programs or solar power on council housing, all kinds of different things. So I hope to think I do have some experience of engaging communities with improving energy efficiency and renewables, but it's certainly not a science, is it? I think it will be quite, what will work in one location will maybe not work somewhere else. And I'm hoping that the attendees today can contribute some ideas for things that have worked well for you in the past, and maybe just as valuable perhaps could be things that maybe haven't worked so well. So I have created a short presentation which I'll go through, sharing some of the things which have worked well for us in the past. And then we can open up for questions and idea sharing at the end. So I'll try and share my screen now. So we go. Does that look all right?
It's there on screen. Yeah, perfect.
Well, excellent, cool. Because yeah, okay, I'm never entirely sure that's worked. Okay, so okay, well let's have a look. Oh, wait, now we'll go forwards. Hold on, sorry. There we go. Yeah, so I think particularly when it comes to trying to speak with communities about energy efficiency in particular, it can be easy to forget that those of us that have worked in the industry for a while just get used to there's so many different acronyms and jargon which most people probably won't understand. You know, if you're telling someone how they can improve their EPC by installing a TRV, that doesn't make any sense, you know. So I think to try and be aware of that in all your communications, whether that's written, whether that's a leaflet or social media posts, or most importantly speaking to people in person, is to try and keep it as simple as possible so that everybody can understand. Where I suppose where acronyms of things are unavoidable, you could explain what they are, but instead of maybe saying a TRV, you could say a thermostatic radiator valve or whatever it is, and trying to make it accessible to your audience so that people can really understand what you're talking about and don't get just swamped and drowned by some of the more technical aspects that can be involved with energy efficiency work. I also think it's very important, where possible, to try and tailor your messaging to make it as hyper local as possible. There are a couple of resources around I've listed here. So I know sometimes you could talk to somebody about how the average national energy performance certificate is a D or whatever it is you might have read in the way that kind of a national newspaper might report on energy efficiency levels and things. But particularly this resource in the middle, the EPC open data communities, you can really drill down to get really hyper local information on even just on a street by street or a postcode. Yeah, it can even be just down to a street. You can find the energy performance certificate data just for that one street. So you could say that if you're having a campaign on a particular street, for example, you can find out what the energy efficiency, the existing energy efficiency levels on that street are. Obviously, I think Jonathan had some comments about the reliability of energy performance certificates.
Yeah, I think EPC data we know is low cost to collect, and therefore there's good coverage across the UK. But we also know that that low cost means that the data quality is low quality as well. And I think our general line on it is that it's a useful engagement strategy for kind of, area-based engagement, as Dan says, but that people shouldn't translate that to an individual property, and they shouldn't think, because my EPC says this and that, then I should do this. It's indicative rather than prescriptive, and and that data should be treated with caution.
Yeah, but sometimes we're getting an idea of what a street or a postcode or a city looks like. It can give some idea. Of course, not every property has an EPC or has to have an EPC. We just recently, BESCO are pursuing a campaign on an individual street, and I was able to pull up some of the EPC data for that street, but about half of the properties didn't have one, which would suggest that those they're owner occupiers who have lived in that property for more than 10 years, and they don't rent, and they haven't needed to lodge an EPC for at least 10 years. So you can't, obviously, it's not, the data isn't there for 100% of all properties in any given area, but I think there was about maybe 60% on the particular street that I was looking at. This other resource with a much longer URL, which I've listed here, is a government resource where you can find information about kind of average gas or electricity use for different housing types. So whether it's like a 2-bedroom flat or a semi-detached house, and it also has average gas and electricity use and expenses for like income levels and things like that. So if you wanted, it's another tool that can help you to tailor your messaging to a very specific audience if you needed that data. Okay, so moving on, I think one of the hardest parts really in a community-focused energy efficiency campaign is trying to get across to your audience that you are running this campaign for the benefit of the community and not for your own gain. And I think one of the most powerful tools to do that is by trying to get a trusted local influencer who people know on your side. Obviously, we're very fortunate at Brighton and Hove that we have, I think, one of the best MPs in the country, Caroline Lucas, is usually, if she's available, always willing to support our campaigns. Whether it's the example here was when we were to do the Community Energy England fortnight, I think last week. We had a little photo up at one of BESCO's solar arrays. So where possible, recruiting your local member of parliament to give a quote or take a photograph to lend an endorsement, I suppose, to your campaign can be very valuable, obviously, because then it kind of lends a credence and legitimacy to your campaign, which can be hard to overcome. Councillors can also, I think, give a similar contribution. I suppose really just any individual in your community that you could think of that people already know and trust and have confidence in, that what they're saying is for the benefit of that community. So if you are able to get people on your side to help share your message, then that really can be invaluable. And the same, as well as individuals, that same logic applies for other groups who might have been very long established groups that have been active in that area, who can help to amplify your message. I've named a few examples here of groups that we have worked with in the past in Brighton and Hove. But I'd hope that possibly either the other attendees might have other ideas or comments of groups that you've worked with in the past who can be contacted to maybe include, if you're having an energy efficiency campaign locally, maybe these groups could put something in their newsletter or on their social media channels to help share your message and encourage people to get involved. So if you have any ideas there, please you could share at the end of my presentation, or you can put it in the chat now. But yeah, okay. Let's move on. Yeah, so in addition to local influencers, you might be able to identify local community champions who have already had energy efficiency work or renewable energy work installed in their house, who could be like a passionate advocate for others to do the same. Probably one of the best examples of a way to do that would be through an eco open housing event, if that happens in your area, or if it doesn't, maybe you could look to establish that, which is where people can, members of the community, members of the public can come into someone's house and kind of have a guided tour around somebody's eco home to look firsthand at all the different measures they've installed to make their home more energy efficient, and in the example of this photograph here, maybe start generating their own local electricity, renewable electricity, and people can obviously ask questions and kind of receive some first-hand anecdotal experience of hopefully positive experience that people have had through, let's just say, installing double glazed windows and what a difference that made to their warmth and comfort levels, and probably cutting down on bills as well. There's a couple of good digital tools as well where you might be able to recruit a local community champion. There's that group Next Door. It's quite a good forum for posting things on a street by street, or is it postcode by postcode level, and Facebook often has similar community groups, and quite often, especially since the pandemic, there's WhatsApp groups sometimes on the street as well, so that can be a good avenue for sharing and promoting any campaigns that you have. And very often there's, particularly in the summer months, there's probably a lot of community events that are going on in different parks and town squares and things like that where you live. This photograph here was from an eco event at the local market, where it just provides a good opportunity not only to promote your message and your campaign and hand out literature, but you can quite often recruit sounds like the wrong word, but you can meet people who live in the local area and maybe could become a local champion on your behalf. You can get newsletter sign-ups through these events, and sometimes if there's a panel discussion, you might be able to get invited to take part in that, to share your news and keep people updated on what you're doing. As I alluded to earlier, I think one of the hardest challenges with local campaigns is to communicate that you are running this campaign for the benefit of people that live and work in these communities, and not for your own gain. And that can be very challenging. Just last week, Besco, as part of this whole street retrofit campaign we're engaged with, we went on a door knocking exercise on this street, knocking on people's doors and inviting them to a launch event, which we're holding tomorrow. And most people were very receptive and said, great, excellent, we'll see you there. But there was one resident who just said, it sounds like a scam to me, and pretty hard. It's very hard to convince him otherwise, when sometimes when things are maybe too good to be true. And I appreciate that there's a lot of people have to be cautious these days, and that can be a difficult challenge to overcome. So hopefully some of the things I've already mentioned, like this is where having a community champion or a trusted local group or a local influencer should hopefully help you overcome that barrier. And I think also, if possible, it's always a great idea to try and use real photographs that you've taken instead of stock images that you find on the internet, because it just lends a credence to your campaign and to your organization, especially if you can demonstrate that you've been out in the community doing work in the past as well. Help people to trust what you're talking about. And I know that when it comes to energy efficiency, sometimes people can talk about the economic benefits, the cost payback of installing certain measures. But realistically, some energy efficiency measures can take more than 10 years to pay back with the savings that you'll make. So perhaps in some examples, the economic argument maybe isn't always the strongest argument. So I think to try and focus on the sort of unmeasurable benefits of how much warmer and more comfortable a property would be once efficiency measures have been installed, whether that's topping up the loft insulation or cavity wall insulation or windows. That can be a real driver. And also communicating that living in a warm and dry home has really excellent long-term health benefits, I think, especially when it comes to cardiovascular health and avoiding or reducing strokes and things like that. Living in a home that's easy and affordable to heat has major benefits. And of course, to some members of your community might resonate more talking about the environmental benefits of cutting down on your carbon emissions by installing energy efficiency measures. Oh, yeah. And in addition to community champions and local influencers, if possible, it could sometimes be a good idea just to get the people from the area that where you're running your campaign, try and get them together, whether it could be in a pub or a cafe or whatever's most appropriate, where people can share their own experiences of perhaps what their houses are like currently, the existing state of people's properties, and maybe they can also share their positive experiences of installing measures and making a significant improvement to their ongoing energy costs and the quality of warmth and comfort. I just thought of an example. Let's say you did have a meet up in the side room of a pub or something like that. If you had access to it, you could potentially bring along a thermal imaging camera. You could demonstrate how that works and how that can pick up on the like cold spots or whatever. And I think people will be able to see how you can identify weaknesses in a building and hopefully take remedial action to improve that. Maybe people could have a go with the thermal camera. Sometimes I know you can rent them from other organizations and stuff. So that's just something to think about. And of course, a good way to engage your local community is by hosting your own webinar, much like this one. Because of course, if you did have an in-person event, people might not be able to make that. People might be at work or maybe not at home or caring for children or whatever. So sometimes having a digital online event means that shouldn't be any issues with accessibility, and as is the case with today's meeting, it can be recorded as well. So again, if people aren't able to make the time and date of your event, you can have it as an online resource for people to access in their own time. And perhaps as well as hosting your own webinar, there's always loads of webinars hosted by other organizations which you could take part in to further, just like today's, to further expand your own knowledge and find out what, especially in the quite fast changing environment of energy right now, what new grants are available and what new funding streams are available. This could be a good idea, whether there was a webinar hosted by BEIS, which is the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, or Ofgem, or Energy Saving Trust have some, or the Heat Pump Association, or whatever. A quick Google search, I'd say, of energy efficiency webinars. There's always loads to choose from, which will have really up-to-date, kind of cutting-edge updates of what's available and what's going on in the rest of the country and maybe even Europe as well. That's just a few ideas that I had of things that we at BESCO have engaged in the past to try and engage communities with retrofit. So I think now is probably a good time to bring in Jonathan and anybody from South East London Community Energy who might have thought of some other ideas. If anything came to mind whilst I was going through my presentation, or any other ideas you'd like to share, or if other attendees have any questions, that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we kind of go into more of an informal conversation.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think maybe the stuff, like a lot of the stuff, is similar to the approaches we've taken. I think there is a challenge when you are developing a more fee-earning service, in that the communication challenges become slightly different because it's not necessarily a free thing. It's something that there is a charge for, but then the emphasis comes around like not-for-profit, member ownership, that sort of thing, to try and address those kind of things around scams. I mean, we've been doing this for 15 years, and like, scam is like one of the first things that was thrown at us 15 years ago. The other thing I think to emphasize is about householder engagement and surveying and research. I think to better understand kind of the needs and priorities of householders, so that you can then tailor your engagement strategies to those. What are their priorities? What are their needs? What are they after? What are the barriers that they face? That sort of thing. And I think like that kind of research piece, it can act as kind of a form of engagement, but also a form of like wider research that can inform lots of other things as well as engagement. And I think as well as that kind of research up front, I think the other thing I'd really emphasize is kind of evaluation after engagement. One of the first things we ask people is kind of, where did he hear about us? And that kind of very basic question, but obviously we do more detailed and engaged feedback on beyond that. But that very basic kind of asking enables you to build up a picture of what's effective about your engagement and what's not so effective. Because, you know, obviously it's nothing worse than putting a lot of time and resources into communication or engagement channels that aren't being effective, especially if, you know, not necessarily, but if you put staff time or actual resource into it. I always think things like, personally at Carbon Co-op, very limited effectiveness of things like leaflets and posters and adverts in newspapers. We found a very, very poor engagement and conversion on those kind of things. Whereas like, I think the key to it all is word of mouth, which is a kind of much kind of underrated communication tool, because people, oh, word of mouth, yeah, heard about it, can't really quantify that, can't really source it. But to engender a process by which information spreading by word of mouth is like the most effective engagement method, because it is extremely trusted, because people trust their friends, neighbours and colleagues. And secondly, it's cost effective, because if you can like engender and create and sort of catalyze that process, you know, it can go very far, you know. So yeah, there's a few observations from me. I don't know about Gio.
I think it would be interesting to talk about the value proposition. Actually, the extent to which you emphasize the financial versus the climate benefits. And I don't have any easy answers to this, but so this is very much anecdotal. I think there is certainly you need to understand the needs of the client, and there is a certain client that will be demotivated by a financial message, far more motivated and far more committed by a climate message. So I think it is quite often we assume, because we've had, you know, we've been banging our heads against a brick wall when it comes to talking about climate change for years and years and years, that we assume that people will not be engaged by that message. It feels that recently there has been a systemic or certain, there's been a shift in attitudes. And my instinct is that, you know, that increasingly we should attempt a climate message, one that is about community responsibility, one that is about responsibility to the planet, to future generations, because that might potentially be far more motivating than a simple finance and comfort message. Obviously, it depends on the client, but this is my anecdotal sense. Yeah. Jonathan, best go. Jonathan, Dan, any thoughts? Am I off on a limb here?
No, absolutely. I think, yeah, it's just a case of tailoring the message to an audience, isn't it? Some people, as you say, will be motivated by long-term financial savings. Possibly a younger audience maybe might be more motivated by the environmental savings. I think potentially right now, with the cost of living increase and the energy price increases coming again in October, maybe if people could afford, if people are in a position to make an investment in their home right now that's going to last for 20 years, some people thinking that, you know, that would be a motivator, that you could make a long-term reduction. But yeah, of course, the climate is important as well. I had a question pop into my mind when Jonathan was talking about the value of spoken word engagement. I was wondering whether, as we did this door knocking exercise last week, we were really kind of ruminating over when is the best time to knock on people's doors, when you're not going to be irritating people, but when they're also possibly going to be at home. So I don't know if people have any experience. Like I opted for 5 p.m. between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, when I kind of hope that people might have finished work and probably not started cooking dinner yet. It's difficult, isn't it? The last thing I really want to do is to annoy somebody by knocking on their doors. But door knocking is a great way to start that conversation. So I don't know if Gia or Jonathan have any experience or suggestions or advice on that.
Ways too much. There isn't the right time. It really just depends on people. And Jonathan?
We don't do any door knocking, and this relates to like the first ever project we did, which was in Moss Side in 2009, where the funder wanted us to choose a specific street, and they said, "Oh, choose 2 streets, and then that'll be your streets." And we did door knocking, we did street party at the end of the road, we engaged with the allotment association and the tenants association, and we used energy savings trust as well. And like the engagement was extremely poor. It was really poor take up. It was a very poor way to engage people in this area. We were quite dispirited by the process, and what happened was I went on community radio in that area, Moss Side area, and they said, "Come on and do a phone-in show with some questions, common questions." And we had an hour, and it was absolutely buzzing with loads of calls, loads of people asking. And after that, loads of people from the local area contacted us and said, "Please come to our area and do stuff." And we got involved in a street carnival, like huge number. We engaged more numbers than we thought we were going to at the start, and very few from those streets. And that told us, that's the thing. I think that idea of social marketing, which we've latched onto more recently, is basically to work with the community and with their needs and priorities, rather than those of a kind of predefined kind of, like a funder or potentially a council who says, for our reasons, we want you here. It's actually like, no, like we go where people want us, basically. And it sounds like a bit of a truism and a bit of a kind of like, well, yeah, obviously, but it's a really effective and really impactful. And what we've found more latterly is that through the Community Champions projects, which you were talking about, Dan, is what we do is empower householders to talk to their neighbours. And we host sessions where they want them. So we've done them in the back room of a pub, in a church hall, in people's living room, like all manner of different places where they feel comfortable. And secondly, we enable them to communicate in the way they think best. So people have like handwritten notes and put them through doors. They've got neighborhood WhatsApp groups. They've got emails, or they just see people in the street, and what works for one area might be just totally different to another. And again, our expertise is in catalyzing that community social marketing, community spread, rather than like being really good at leaflets or door knocking or that sort of thing. And it I think it makes sense in that context,
How were you able to identify the community champions in the first place?
Basically by being open, and by that kind of thing about community radio. You're sort of raising awareness in an area. So what you're doing there is, there are in a certain area, geographical area, there are a number of people that are looking for you. They're looking for someone like you, and they've been looking for someone like you for many years, because we get these emails all the time, when are you coming to Norwich, or like, so there's people like, so spreading over a certain area and communicating in the channels that those people are more likely to communicate in, means that you pick up those community champions. We did a fantastic project with a woman from the Nigerian community who was like super enthusiastic about environmental stuff and had been looking for tools and techniques and resources. And once she connected with us, we were enabled her to go out to the wider Nigerian community. And it was a really good engagement within a specific demographic that we would be very challenged to do so otherwise, because we don't have those links, contacts, or trust networks, you know.
Yeah. I don't know if Gio had anything to add. Oh, you get. Did you see there's a question from Mary and in the chat regarding different approaches perhaps for a rural energy efficiency campaign compared to a urban-based campaign. I mean, we're all based in cities. It's a bit hard to comment on that. I appreciate door knocking possibly in a rural community isn't even an option if walking on the roads might be dangerous if there's sometimes not even a pavement in some rural communities. But I would hope that some rural communities would still have some of those same resources, namely a WhatsApp group for the area, or I think as Phil mentioned in the chat here, making use of the parish newsletter. Often rural towns and villages have a parish newsletter, which is a great resource for news and campaigns and events. Did you have any ideas, Gio or Jonathan, as regards to the rural approach?
I mean, I think the same principles apply to urban as per rural. What you have to use is you have to approach this with a community development hat on rather than a technological transition hat on. And so using your networks, using trusted intermediaries, using those clients who you have managed to engage their neighbors. It's the same stuff whether it's rural or urban. I think obviously the offer is probably going to be quite different in rural areas. But actually, in some ways, because you've got more off gas, actually with a retrofit offer, you may well be better responding to people's needs. So with a retrofit offer, because obviously, off gas is invariably more expensive to heat, and quite often you've got more detached housing, and you've got a greater need. So yeah.
And I think so. I know Wirksworth, I know Mary as well, and I think some more rural areas, like I grew up on the edge of the North Yorkshire Moors, and a lot of my family live in the North Yorkshire Moors, and in those contexts, you can have very strong local networks in a variety of different things, from sports clubs, faith networks, every village, certainly in the North Yorkshire Moors, practically every village has a cricket club, has a community centre, has quite often a church hall and a community hall as well. So there are existing networks that can be plugged into, and I think I'm a huge advocate for collaborating with those networks rather than trying to create and replicate them. It's been a big thing of mine, which I've never really cracked yet, is to get into things like Rotary networks and WI as well, and different kind of thematic networks as well. I think my observation is that some of those networks tend to be more favoured by the older people, although I think it's a bit much to say that it's exclusively older people. But I also see many new electronic networks emerging within rural contexts. And I certainly know the villages in North Yorkshire Moors, everyone has a really active Facebook group, and got various different ethics about Facebook and what have you, but they're a fantastic way into a very engaged network of local people that tend to be more diverse in age than some of these like faith networks, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I think as I kind of said right, I think from the outset, trying to get trusted organizations and individuals on board to be a conduit for your message is invaluable. I suppose I mean, I think you just pick up those contacts through years of experience, right? From just being out in the community, and especially doing fuel poverty work. You know, at Brighton and Hove, we develop a relationship with the Citizens Advice, or you know, just other organisations that are around. But I'm trying to think of what the best approach would be for a new organisation who hasn't been around for 7 years, who hasn't developed those networks to try and. Would you just suggest just doing online research on Google or something to try and find the contact of local partners that you can think of, and then to contact them to help with your campaign?
Well, I think it's all about being embedded in your community. If you're part of your community, then and you're engaging with all the resources of your staff, your volunteers, your directors, then you will find out about the active community groups.
Definitely.
So I just wanted to pick up on your point actually earlier in the presentation, Dan, about offering information that is local and, you know, being able to nail down on those EPCs in a very local way, to give examples rather than a national average, a local average. And Phil has actually posted in the chat a tool which is really quite useful in demonstrating local CO2 levels. So it's impacttool.org.uk, and you can break down what your local area's carbon emissions are expected or assumed to be at, and what type of what area this is coming from, so whether it's from housing or from transport or from something else. I just thought I would pick up on a few other bits from the chat as well.
Sure.
So we've also got some feedback about you know, getting people engaged pre and post retrofit, and evaluating that process as well. I think on behalf of CELSI, we found that that is really important, but also really hard to do. Especially when it comes to you know, the communication that goes out around retrofit being, you can get this work done, this is how it will work, and then having that lack of suppliers, which links into our previous sessions. It's been quite hard to monitor what work people have actually managed to get done, and I think in terms of communications, that kind of leaves a bit of a gap and a bit of a sort of struggle for people to stay engaged if they're not able to get contractors and not able to get as much work done as they would like. But I do think that point is really important about getting feedback and evaluation. So Sarah's also asking in the chat if people have templates for any resident surveys. Please do share them. We're really keen for these sessions to, you know, be collaborative and to encourage people to collaborate and learn from each other, and you know, learn from our experiences running them. So please do share those.
What's the context of resident survey there? Because I mean, there are kind of energy evaluation surveys and that sort of thing, or there's more kind of qualitative information.
I think this is talking about a survey of levels of retrofit completed before they've gone through the retrofit process and after they've gone through the retrofit process. Energy surveys, yeah. What else have we got? So Sarah's also asking, has anyone had any luck using segments, for example, Mosaic or Britain Talks climate segments to target specific groups of people?
Yeah, I mean, we did a bit of this on our BAYS retrofit supply chain pilot funded by BAYS, and we looked at retrofit personas, and there was a really fantastic paper by Loughborough University, a woman called Val, I get her second name, but they've got a really interesting unit there that looks at kind of segmentation, supply chain. Mosaic and others tend to come from basically supermarket surveys. They're kind of based on consumer kind of behavior. What I would say is that retrofit is not a standardized consumer product that people can go and purchase, and to extrapolate from existing surveys into those is kind of it's kind of ineffective and dangerous. It's kind of like basically sort of, trying to project stuff onto this. In terms of retrofit, the people that procure retrofit and get involved with it at the moment are atypical, not typical. And things like Mosaic look for the typical audience. So the thing that we took quite an interesting, innovative approach where we looked at people that we knew were procuring retrofit or more likely to procure retrofit, and then we used spatial information, GIS, to look at areas where these people were more likely to live and to learn some kind of insights into them and their behavior. So they're kind of the atypical and kind of what is the atypical. So I think segmentation is definitely an interesting thing. Personas and that work at Loughborough are really interesting. We developed personas like climate pragmatists and climate idealists. The pragmatists were motivated by climate change, but understood there were limits into what they could do. Whereas the idealists wanted to go to the nth degree to tackle climate change and also adapt their house to climate change impacts as well. And they were willing to go to whatever means, whatever ends they could afford, really. And we also highlighted some civic-minded retirees who were less motivated by climate change in and of itself, and more around the idea of doing good, doing the right thing for their general community. And they tended to be part of civic institutions and faith networks. So they're kind of minded by doing the right thing, and quite a few of those were older people who will not really see a material impact or benefit of their retrofit, but were doing it for the right reasons, essentially.
That's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah. So it is really, building on the local, isn't it? And understanding your own individual people. And I think that's, it just brings us back to why this should be community-based rather than tackled in any other way. So I'll just pick up on a few more points here from the chat. There was some conversation about the whole cost versus climate crisis. And now Phil is saying that because of the energy crisis, both aspects come into it, climate and cost. But there was a comment about the fact that during the summer on a hot sunny day, people don't really think about insulation, don't really think about retrofit, and that in autumn or in winter, these things tend to be more popular. And I know that this is an issue when we've been running Future Fit Homes. We have seen a big drop off in the number of clients over the summer. So I guess my question to panelists is, how do you keep the interest going? Because retrofit is not just a winter thing. It should be done throughout the year, but how do you keep the interest going over the summer? What communications, how would you change your communication seasonally?
Well, I totally agree that historically it has always been quite a mission to get people engaged with retrofit over the summer months. But for Besco's own experience recently, since the massive energy price increase in April, it's already looking like the busiest summer that we've had in the last 7 years of trading and doing energy efficiency, because people obviously are motivated to get work done this summer before the next increase, I think in October. But yeah, even trying to engage people with tariff switching and things in the past in the summer months was always just a non-starter. Even I was really trying to convince people that was probably the best time to do it, because it could take 3 to 4 weeks to change supplier, or not to change supplier, not tariff, but and to get that done over the summer rather than leaving it to the winter months. But as you say rightly, when the sun's shining and the weather's warm, people historically haven't really cared. But I think the record high energy costs that we're all experiencing right now will act as a motivator for people to take action over the summer months in preparation for winter. But we will see. I wasn't sure if Jonathan was just repositioning his head or raising his hand there.
No, I was just looking at the chat. We tend to basically focus our activity in autumn and spring, and take the summer to kind of reflect and build new kind of strategies and things, and then there's always a bit of a gap around Christmas. So yeah, our work is kind of seasonal.
Yeah, Christmas is always a nightmare. People are distracted doing Christmas stuff. I think money's always a bit tight around Christmas as well, isn't it? So that's, yeah. I wondered if people had any thoughts on this comment from Sophie here, asking about what kind of engagement could be done for people that are renters or basically not homeowners. So people that are privately rent, perhaps, or live in housing associations. From just to start the ball rolling, I know that quite often in housing associations, or even in larger council blocks of flats, quite often those properties have a communal room, don't they? Which makes it brilliant to host like a talk or a workshop where all the residents just really need to come downstairs for an hour, and of course there's usually tea and biscuits, which is brilliant. But I think those kind of workshops that we've given in the past is more about behaviour and getting into good energy saving behaviour, and potentially also, you know, any renter or someone who lived in a housing association or council housing can purchase what we would call soft measures, kind of light touch energy efficiency measures that you might be able to get from Robert Dias or B&Q, you know, things like secondary window glazing or rad fleck panels and those kind of things. I think is where you can engage non-homeowners to take some action to improve the energy efficiency of their home.
I mean, we at Celsius are currently working on a project that targets private renters, and Nadia's actually leading on this. It's in partnership with our local authority, and basically they have an interest in it. They don't have the capacity to do the outreach to enforce MEES regulations, the minimum energy efficiency standards. So the project is one that takes a carrot and stick approach, whereby the carrot is we'll help you get LAD funding, local authority delivery scheme, Green Home Grant funding, and the stick is obviously we're in contact with the local authority, and you really here is the regulation. Sooner or later, you'll be required to upgrade your property. So yes, there is a way. I think there are ways and means of working with local authorities, and I think we covered this more in the second webinar. Nadia, have you got anything to add about that?
Yeah, I think on this one, you know, focusing on the communication around this, it just goes back to understanding the motivations of the client that you're dealing with. The motivations for our landlords are completely different to the motivations for our homeowners. And it's not necessarily that our landlords are asking about, you know, payback times or anything like that. They're also not really asking about carbon emissions. The main motivation is, what will my EPC score be improved to? And am I in line with regulations, and am I prepared for when regulations go up in the future? So we know that minimum energy efficiency standards are continuing to go up. So that is the main sort of motivation for them. When we were developing communications around this issue, it was really down to thinking about, you know, what value does this hold for landlords? And it came down to, yes, staying in line with regulations, but also trying to link things like, you know, tenants being more comfortable in their properties and spending less money on energy does equate to tenants also staying in the properties longer, you having better and more stable yields and less periods of empty properties. And in some cases, you know, tenants actually being able to afford the rent more easily and paying on time and things like that. So it's really, I would just say, it's another type of client. Don't think of it as a sector that you can't get into. It's just trying to dig in and understand what their motivations are.
I think also, I mean, you can, what we're discovering is that landlords often own multiple properties. You engage one and you've managed to do work on, you'll manage to do work on 10 properties. So it's definitely worth, I think, looking at engaging landlords, simply because they can be a very good payback in terms of effort and number of properties you've supported.
Absolutely. All right, I think that I wanted to round this sort of conversation up, because we do know that this is the last of our series of webinars. and we wanted to ask everyone attending for some feedback if possible. So we have got a Jamboard document in the chat, and Jonathan will tell you a bit more about that. And then we've also got a survey, a very quick survey, which we would love you to fill out. If you can fill these out, bearing in mind that we've had the 4 different sessions focused on different topics, and give us feedback for them as a collective rather than just today's session.
Yeah, shall I just explain the Jamboard, because people are starting to come on it. So the Jamboard, there's left and right, good and bad, and then there's a mark out of 10 and recommendations. So what you do is you click on the pen here, you click on the link like a number of people have, click on the pen, and you make a strike here, 1 to 10. How good was the session, 1 to 10? And Nadia, do you want to rate people to rate all the ones they've been, or just on the basis of today?
I think for this one, let's just do today's session.
Okay, brilliant.
And then for the survey monkey form, all of the sessions. If that's
great. And then we put good or bad. Click on the sticky note, say what was good, and save it, and it will come here, and you can put things either in the good or the bad. Things that were, great, you really enjoyed about the session, things that could be improved in the future. Just use the sticky note here to create that. Just use the sticky note here. Yeah, good, bad, and things you think we should do in future. Don't move the good and the bad. Put that back. use the thing on the left-hand side, sticky notes. There you go, to create like recommendations. Okay. So is there anything else to say, Nadia?
I think we've covered it. I think there have been a few more points in the chat. So I'll just touch on them whilst everyone is thinking about their answers for the survey. So there was a point about bulk procurement. We talked a little bit more about this in the last sessions on supply chain.
And yeah, I answered that, Chris's point. In the past, we found it quite challenging to bulk procure individual householders' requirements because they tend to be quite specific and time-bound. Procured area-based schemes are more easier, where you're focusing on a scheme and you're procuring for that. And we have found success at doing offers, which tends to be working with suppliers or manufacturers and saying, if could we do a 10% off offer where our members or our beneficiaries contact you, they want your service, and if they quote a code, they'll get 10% off. And that's been really successful for things like triple glazed windows, and like 10% can be a substantial amount of money when it comes to triple glazed windows. So it's quite a winner there.
I think there's also, it's probably worth us mentioning the Retrofit Streets project, which we're all part of running. So this is focused on, 2 aspects. One, retrofit being a local area-based approach, and the second has some aspect of bulk procurement within that. G and Dan, do you want to? Dan, I don't know if you're working on the Retrofit Streets project.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, so I said a couple of weeks ago was when we printed out a load of leaflets. So we're having a launch event tomorrow evening. So rather than just post it through people's letterbox, we did make the effort a couple of weeks ago to try and knock on everyone's door on that street, just to kind of personally invite people to the event, which is tomorrow, rather than just sticking a leaflet through, which was great. We have a champion on that street who has been championing the project. They have a WhatsApp group, so quite a lot of people that we spoke to had actually already heard about it, which was mostly great, but partly you're like, oh, damn, I don't really need to be here at 5:30 on a rainy Tuesday evening. Actually, it's glorious weather as well, so I suppose there's pros and cons to that. Would have rather been down the beach, but it was better than being rained on. Yeah, so the launch event for that's tomorrow. I think we're expecting about 35 people from well, it's quite hard to tell really, because about, not everybody was in, of course, but yeah, so we're having the launch event tomorrow to explain in more detail what people can expect from the Retrofits program, why they should get involved. We're going to take details down for people that are interested in having the one-to-one consultation on their property, and people that are interested in having the solar PV survey. And then in about a month after that, there's the street. We're already having a street party in early July, so we were invited to that as well, which would be like a month into it, where hopefully we'll get some more people to sign up, and we'll have a bit more experience of. Hopefully more people on the street would have heard about it by then as well. Maybe people are a bit shaky at the start, like I'm not really sure what's going on, but once a few people have had their consultations or a solar PV survey and have had a good experience with that, they tell their neighbours, So I'm hoping that next for the street party in July, there'll be people coming up to us saying, oh, actually I am quite interested, can I sign up to that? So that's all, it's all a go with that.
That's great. Yeah, so this is a kind of another research project that Brighton and Hove, Carbon Co-op and ourselves at Celsea are all part of. And essentially we recruit a champion in one street, and they get their neighbours involved, and then we offer retrofit services to that street, building on, the fact that all of the houses should have a similar archetype. And they can all access a sort of group of services, some of it for free and some of it paid for, and hopefully we can get some bulk procurement in there as well. So if you're interested to hear more about that project, do keep in touch with us on the SurveyMonkey form. There is a place to pop your email. If you put that in there, then we will get in touch with you about updates on our retrofit work. But I think we don't have too much time left, actually.
No. So yeah, we'll say a big thank you to everyone. Thanks for coming. We'll leave the Jamboard here for a while, so please do add stuff. There's already some really good comments there. So yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll follow this up with an email with the recording and everything. And thanks a lot.